Arthur Andrus Schroeder tells the story of a poor farm boy from Iowa named Oscar Hartzell, who in 1913 devised a rather clever scheme for separating a good many people from their money. He cooked up the idea of contacting everybody in the United States with the last name of Drake. And he told them that he had made an astonishing discovery. Due to a bureaucratic bumble, the estate of the famous British pirate Sir Francis Drake had never been paid out to his heirs and had been sitting there for 300 years gathering interest. Boy, you know, I think that's a surprise to some of the people who've been out on the Marin coast and in the Drake's Beach, still digging around looking for some of that treasure. But anyway, he said that it was now worth an eye-popping $4 trillion. You know, that was enough money back in 1913 to buy England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. And he invited all the people named Drake from all over North America to invest in his campaign to take the British government to court and to retrieve their rightful inheritance. Well, and he made big promises. He said, you know, for every dollar you invest in this, you should get back 500. And you know what? There are a lot of people who fell for the scam. Well, not just thousands, tens of thousands. Who knew there were that many Drakes in Northern California, in other northern, the whole North America? And it was households that sent Hartzell their grocery money. Kids sent him their allowance. Retirees sent their entire life savings. And there were even some ministers who sent their church's offerings. The former farmer's boy from Iowa who came up with this scam, well, he was able to move to England. He became a duke. He was living like a king in a mansion with maids and gardeners and drivers and butlers. Even after the FBI checked out the story and announced it's a total lie. They said Sir Francis Drake's wife had inherited and duly received her husband's estate back in 1597. Well, people kept sending Hartzell their money. Even after Hartzell was arrested and tried and sent to Leavenworth Penitentiary, people kept sending him their money. They kept sending him their money until he finally died in prison. He had been operating that scam for over 30 years. And we wonder, are people crazy? Are they greedy? Maybe they're just that desperate. Well, you know, we can say, hey, that was a simpler time and people were so naive back then, right? Oh, did you get the email from the wife of the Nigerian prince who is having trouble getting her money released? Just send her some money and she'll cut you in for a share. You know, people are still doing it too, still sending money in for that scam. So maybe we're not so smart after all. But people People want to be financially secure, and maybe then some. But you know what happened to Job is a story about wealth, but it goes the other way. Remember how it starts off? Job was an honest and upright man. He treated everybody fair and square. He worked hard. He had a big house, a happy family, and cattle for, well, as far as you could see. He was doing just fine. And more importantly, he got it by not cheating or scamming anyone. And Job never placed his fortune, his wealth, before God. Well, we know the story takes quite a turn. Disaster struck. The house falls down and kills all his kids. They come and steal all of his flocks and cattle. Job had nothing. And then his health gets taken away. So he's sitting at the dump, scratching his open sores with bits of broken pottery. Well, his friends come to help out. Oh my goodness, the advice they give just is heaping misery on top of his misery. Who needs friends like that? Well, this is where we get in to the scripture today. If Job could find God, he would go right to God's dwelling place and pound on the door and argue his case before and with God. Job says that it is the upright person who has the right to reason with God, who is both judicial adversary and judge. But alas, Job cannot bring his case against or before God if God keeps hiding from him. No matter where he searches, he can't find God on the east or the west, the north or the south. And if you can't find the judicial adversary or judge, you can't go to trial. Job asserts, and it's quite a dilemma. Can you relate to Job? I bet you've all, at one point in your life, maybe for just a few minutes, felt like God deserted you and said, well, where is God? Maybe it was a health crisis, marriage crumbling, financial setback. So many other ways that we have troubling and trying times in our lives where we have our own "where is God" moments. And when he was writing the letter from the Birmingham jail, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. penned these words: "There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over, and men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of injustice where they experience the bleakness of corroding despair." Oh my, the power of those words just like flow from water spilling out of a broken cup. The journey towards reconciliation and justice was marked by bouts of loneliness, criticism and violence, he recorded these words from prison, speaking of the amount of personal sacrifice he was willing to endure for the mere hope of securing a better future for all people. And he wrote to his peers, because his peers were, well, they sounded like Job's friends right at that moment. He wrote to pastors and ministers, community leaders, and public servants in the Birmingham area, seeking both their support and understanding because he was feeling their criticism and rejection. No one is exempt from feeling isolated or deserted. As the disciples of Jesus were called to transform the world by bringing the light of Christ into the darkest, most isolated, the loneliest places in our world. It's human nature to feel forsaken when we lack support and encouragement. Like Dr. King, Jesus was no stranger to feeling deserted. We often read the 22nd Psalm on Good Friday. We recall those words from the start of the psalm from the gospel accounts of Jesus on the cross, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Can you imagine the pain, the agony, the measure of love it takes to sacrifice one's life for another? What does it feel like to be punished for the wrongdoing of others? And why would people risk their lives to make others free? And why must the cause of justice demand such isolation? Dr. King, Jesus, and even Joe are leaders who have faced feeling deserted. These men of morality show a level of leadership, leadership that so few are willing to take on. They were willing to risk their lives for the cause of integrity, for righteousness, and in pursuit of remaining committed to God. So the book of Job presents a unique theological view of God that is contradictory to the loving, caring, just, and kind God that we find predominantly illustrated in the church. Job presents a God who instigates suffering in the lives of those who are righteous, as if we can say it's okay to instigate suffering for those folks who might deserve it. Job discusses the problem of suffering and isolation by the hand of God. He explores the ramifications of what is just within the parameters of suffering without cause or sin. Job is a character of innocence, just and moral, yet he suffers, is deserted, and is condemned by friends and family without wrongdoing. And we wonder, why would God do this to an innocent man? Job enlists the language of the court to argue his innocence before God as a way of defending his honor. He begins with a bitter complaint against a God who has given him a heavy hand. He struggles internally regarding if God is listening, present, or even concerned with his argument or with his case. Job states, "There those who do the right thing can argue with him. I could escape from my judge forever." Job seeks God's relief, wants to hold God accountable, to be just, because Job in his innocence still suffers. Job feels utterly deserted. He seeks to discover God in the east and the west, and looks in the north and the south, and concludes, "I don't see him." What is most interesting about this translation of this text is the use of the word discover in verse 8, and then the word see in verse 9. The Hebrew translation for discover is bain, which means to perceive, discern, understand, or consider. It speaks more of a mental capacity to understand, to comprehend. While verse 9 means, it's the Hebrew word ra, which deals with physical sight, using your eyeballs to perceive something. Can it be that we are so mentally occupied with what we are experiencing in life that we find it difficult to see God in our circumstances? Oh, that's an important point. Let's listen to that again. Can it be that we are so mentally occupied with what we are experiencing in this life that we find it difficult to see God in our circumstances? Ultimately, Job's current circumstance led to this moment of feeling deserted. Well, I'm sure it was more than a moment. It was a long while of Job's life. He assumes God neglects justice because God appears to be indifferent to his case. Job knows that God is a lover of justice, but Job cannot see God. Martin Buber, my goodness, I mean, he's one of our really profound Jewish theologians. Gosh, it's been quite a while that he wrote a book called I and Thou. And he has some really good insights. And he expresses Job's paradox using these words: Job's faith in justice is not broken down, but he is no longer able to have a single faith in God and justice. Although God and justice are not mutually aligned in his current situation, he cannot forego his claim that they will again be united. Somewhere, sometime, although he has no idea in his mind when that might be achieved. Therefore, God is perceived by Job, and Job shows us a difficult aspect of what it means to be a faithful Christian. Even, maybe especially, during those why, where is God moments. Job maintained hope. Even though Job cannot see God, God is mindful of Job. Hope is an assurance of God even when God's justice is elusive and God's presence a mystery. Hope, in this sense, is not just a belief or a speculation. Hope is something that we live for, strive for, long for, not just for ourselves, but for others. Job hopes for justice and hopes for God even when he cannot exclusively see God and justice together in his current state. Oh, the book of Job is troubling, isn't it? Is it fair? Is it fair that Jamie suffers all the medical complications that come along with mitochondrial disease? As a dad, I can say, hey, no way. Is it just that a loving and good parents are faced with giving over large portions of their time caring for, or maybe the part that really bothers me, fighting for the medical care that a chronically disabled daughter needs? I say certainly not in a country with the resources that our country has. Should we give up hope? No way. Never, ever. Like Job, hang on and wait. Now, sometimes maybe we don't do so patiently. But hang on and wait for God's compassion. It will shine through in our times of struggle. Job teaches us to hang on to hope, especially when that hope seems elusive. And the good news, because I know at some point you might feel deserted, but the good news is God doesn't ever desert us. We just have moments when we get too wrapped up in our own inner thinking and our inner worries to see that God is with